Imagine you're on the team to dismantle the federal government. You were selected for your intelligence and ability to shrink offices, to shrink agencies. And you wake up one morning and you realize you can't do it anymore. It's too much destruction, and you refuse to be a part of it. That's what we're seeing with over 20 career employees walking out saying, "No, Elon, we're not doing this." What does this mean for Doge and for the rest of the federal government? Let's get into it. On February 25th, 21 employees from Doge dropped a resignation letter. They sent it straight to the White House Chief of Staff. And it's something. These are not interns either. These are IT professionals, product managers, data scientists, and they just refuse to use their tech skills to, and I quote, dismantle critical public services. That's a pretty bold accusation. Here's exactly what they wrote. We swore to serve the American people and uphold our oath to the Constitution across presidential administrations. However, it has become clear that we no longer honor those commitments at the U.S. Doge service. And then they doubled down and added, we will not use our skills to compromise core government systems, jeopardize American sensitive data, or dismantle critical public services. I mean, this is not just quitting. This is quitting with a bold message. And maybe it was the tens of thousands of federal employees that were recently terminated, that were recently fired and let go from their jobs, and realizing maybe they're not the enemy. Maybe they're not the ones who created these jobs. Potentially, it could be the congressional representatives that actually advocated for these jobs to be created, or maybe some senior executives within the agency advocated for the jobs to be created. It wasn't them. It's not the GS7 secretary or the GS9 administrative assistant. They're not the ones who created the job. These are middle-class Americans. Sometimes they're lower middle class. Studies have shown that there are private sector counterparts that end up making more money than they do. And they have a family, they have kids, they have a mortgage. But what's the loud message that we're receiving from a lot of people is, well, just get over it. It happens every day in the private sector. Just get over it. Well, it's easy to say get over it. The expectation when you're applying, when you're spending 6 to 12 months and you're applying for a federal government job, when you finally get the job offer and you're jumping through all the hoops with the fingerprints and the photos and some cases there's a polygraph test, there's a lie detector test, they're very intrusive in your background when it comes to the secret and the top secret clearances, and you're doing all of this, the expectation is you will be retained if you meet a performance standard. Well, in the vast majority of cases, that performance standard was met. But the other end of the bargain was not met. They were arbitrarily let go and fired. Okay, now a quick backstory. Doge used to be the U.S. Digital Service, or the USDS, founded in 2014 under Obama to make government websites less terrible. But then Elon Musk rolls in and he changes it. Doge. We're going to call it Doge. Why? It's a cryptocurrency. He likes the crypto coin. One of the reasons why he likes it so much is some of his Tesla employees were buying it, they were investing or trading in it. So he jumped on the bandwagon and he thought it was a wonderful thing. But now the organization is focused on slashing federal workforce, slashing the budget, just making things more efficient. But Elon Musk, he doesn't agree with anything I just said. And in fact, he took to Twitter, or X, and he gave his response. More fake news from the Associated Propaganda. These were Democratic political holdovers who refused to return to the office, and they would have been fired if they had not resigned. Is this true? I personally don't think that Elon Musk likes the idea of Doge losing any public support. If you spend any time on X, you'll notice that every few days he's posting up a new chart showing or convincing people that Doge has enormous public support. 60, 65, 70% of Americans in these charts, they have been shown to support Doge. But even if you wanted to fire these people, was it because of performance? Was it because of misconduct? Or was it a reduction in force? Because if it's a reduction in force, they need a 60-day notice. But surprisingly, Elon Musk doesn't even technically run Doge. This came up in the press because they were scrambling around saying, what's Elon's role in this? What's Elon's role in that? Elon officially is a senior advisor to the president. And who runs Doge is actually a lady named Amy Gleason. Her LinkedIn profile page says that she's a senior advisor to USDS. That is now the agency that Doge belongs to, and she is the acting administrator. So Elon is not a Doge employee. He's more like a Doge cheerleader. The resignation letter continues, and I quote, "Their removal endangers millions of Americans who rely on these services every day. The sudden loss of their technology expertise makes critical systems in America's data less safe." This is something that has been discussed a lot recently, and it's the idea of a public crisis forming or getting worse. So if you're looking for your Social Security check, if you're looking for an adjudication on your Social Security benefits, if you're a veteran that is waiting to see if they're getting disability, if they're getting the benefits that they have earned, if maybe there are wildfires and we do not have enough firefighters to combat those wildfires, or let's say you're a little bit lower on the economic totem pole and you had a dream to always own a house, even though that seems ridiculous right now with the housing prices. But let's say you had a dream to own a house and maybe an FHA loan could make that dream a reality. Maybe that doesn't happen. Or maybe it takes a lot longer to happen. These ex-employees are saying not only is this inefficient, but it's dangerous. Now, let's put some numbers on this. The federal government employs about 2.2 million civilian workers today. That's according to the Doge.gov website that was recently brought online. If you go through there and you start clicking things, it just takes you right back to Twitter. But let's say Doge gets its way. Initially, it wanted to get rid of 75% of all the federal workforce. That's like 1.5 million. But let's say we just cut a third, let's say 700,000 jobs. How would the country react to that? Well, there's some people that have this idea that all the federal jobs are in Washington, D.C., and that's the swamp, and we just got to drain the swamp. The reality is 20% of federal government jobs exist in D.C. The other 80 exist throughout the country and in some situations in different countries. So what will end up occurring is local economies throughout the country will be impacted. And you know who's going to hear about it? Not necessarily President Trump. It's the congressional representatives. When they go back to their district to hear from their people, they're going to hear about it. And it's already been happening in Florida and Georgia. Here, this is an example. And this is probably only going to increase as the rifts get deeper and deeper. People, not just the individual, but everybody has people around them, their friends, their families. This is going to impact a lot more. Let's say that hypothetical example we just used, 700,000, times that by 3 or 4. Talking about 2 million people being outraged across the country. Now, this also impacts one of the first agencies that was hit was USAID. You know what else USAID does aside from all the crazy stuff they listed on social media? They buy food from farmers. They actually spend $140 million a year buying food in order to send it to different countries. Now, you can look at this as a subsidy, I suppose. Maybe they were subsidizing the farmers to a certain extent. And if you're not sending that food, well, that product isn't selling anymore. And it's not just the cuts. The letter mentions strange interviews where Doge staffers were grilled about political loyalty. So they were made to feel like it was the Hunger Games out there. And these employees are saying that the vibe went from public service to a purge. Many people are just not sticking around for it. With the deferred resignation, over 70,000 people jumped on that to get out of the federal workforce. And more people would have accepted it if they believed it was legitimate, if they believed it was legal. Because by the time a judge actually looked at it, gave his opinion on the matter, as soon as he said it was okay to continue, they shut it down. Last week, Elon put out on X that every federal employee had to answer the OPM email telling them what they achieved over the last week. And he even said failure to reply will be seen as a resignation. Now, in reality, when he was pushed further for his intention, this was considered a pulse check. It doesn't seem like a pulse check. It seems like a performance review. But Apparently, to him, this was a pulse check to see if you were alive, to see if there were any federal employees that perhaps were not alive or not even in existence. Were they still receiving a paycheck? Now, the White House said that over 1 million people replied, and then the other million, well, they didn't reply. And a lot of times it was because of the directive that they received from their agency head. But we're probably going to see another email come out. So what's the big picture here? These resignations are not just a pushback on Elon Musk and President Trump. This is essentially a warning siren that they're sending, saying there's crisis coming ahead of us. And I personally believe there is fraud, waste, and abuse occurring across the federal government, and it should be stopped. And a lot of this fraud and waste is taking shape in multi-billion-dollar contracts. And it's not the GS6 or the GS7 or the individual that's making $55,000 a year trying to keep a system in compliance when it comes to privacy regulations. It's not that individual that's the corruption, that's the fraud, that's the waste or the abuse. Look higher on the totem pole. Aim higher and see where it's coming from. Because as much as you chop, as many federal employees that you chop randomly, that's not going to do anything if you do not focus in on what is actually creating the jobs. There are people that are getting rich in the federal government, but it's not the bottom 90%. It's not those folks. As much as some people love to despise the worker bees in the federal government, they're not the ones that are exploiting taxpayers. It's the people that are closer to power. It's mainly politicians. Remember that Doge's expiration date, the day that it dissolves, is July 4th, 2026. That is, unless they extend it. That wouldn't be very efficient of them. Now, if you're looking at the federal workforce, if you're looking for an opportunity, if you're looking for a government job, many people are not. But there are still reports of people getting interviewed, people getting job offers, and people starting their first day in agencies like the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, HHS, Department of Justice, especially with law enforcement, public safety, immigration. They're still hiring. If you're interested about exactly what jobs are hiring under the Trump administration, at least for right now, I want you to check this video out next. If you need a federal resume example, check out the links down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.